sides, though his fingers tightened slightly as if he were holding on to something fragile, maybe his calm, maybe the last scrap of courage he still possessed. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of desert dust and the cold tang of metal. The Apache horses tossed their heads, their bridles chiming with a faint, ominous rattle. The Apache chief sat tall on his horse, a figure like an ancient tree that had weathered countless storms but refused to break. He spoke a long string of Apache words, deep, steady, carved from stone. Even without knowing the language, Gideon understood this wasn't a greeting. Aida drew a slow breath, her voice rasping as she translated. He says, "The Apache do not let a life debt drift away like dust. You saved us. So an answer must be given. An answer no one is allowed to refuse." Gideon stiffened. He looked at her. What answer? Aida didn't respond right away. Her eyes flickered just for an instant, revealing that she, too, was not comfortable with what came next. Then she said quietly, "He wishes to give me to you." The world seemed to freeze. Gideon heard the words, but they didn't make sense. Not because of language, but because they clashed violently with the life he'd been living. He, a man who had buried himself inside silence, who'd lived 3 years as if dead, who wanted nothing and no one, was suddenly being dragged into a fate he had never asked for. "No," Gideon stepped back, shaking his head. He didn't finish, because Aida cut him off. "He is not asking. He is assigning." As if to reinforce the point, the chief nudged his horse forward. He dismounted with slow, deliberate control. His eyes, dark and fathomless, locked directly onto Gideon. There was no anger in them, no threat, just the crushing weight of a father's decision. Aida continued translating, her voice thin. He says, "Refusing would be an insult." And the Apache do not forget insults. A chill crawled up Gideon's back. He knew exactly what that meant. A man living on the edge of Apache territory couldn't survive being their enemy. If they saw him as dishonorable, he'd be cut off, no trade, no protection. His house could be burned. His livestock could vanish. He could disappear into the night and no one would question it. But agreeing meant opening his home and his fractured heart to someone he didn't know, didn't understand, and wasn't sure he could trust. Aida's gaze locked with his. For the first time, something softened barely, like a crack in armor. "You think I want this?" Her voice was low but steady. "But if you refuse, when my father dies, I die too." Gideon blinked, stunned. She continued, "There is a northern tribe. They say I bring misfortune. They say I caused the death of a warrior I was once promised to. When my father is gone, they will come for me. They will not stop." Her eyes, so fierce before now, revealed a deep, exhausted despair, a war she'd been fighting long before collapsing in front of his trough. "My father wants to protect me, but he only has one winter left." Her voice cracked like dried earth. "And you are the last choice." Gideon's jaw tightened. He hated being used as a shield, hated being pushed into a corner. But when he looked at the two Apache women, half dead, half alive, and the old chief trying to hold his family together in his final season of strength, he saw Sarah. He saw her lying in their bed, fading, gripping his shirt, whispering, "It wasn't your fault." He'd carried that whisper like a shackle for 3 long years. And now he was facing another woman on the verge of losing everything because of him. Gideon sucked in a breath. 2 worlds tugged at him from opposite sides, the Apache on the ridge, and his empty cabin behind him. Aida looked at him again, not pleading, not begging, just waiting for truth, even if it killed her. The chief stepped forward, took Aida's wrist, and placed her hand firmly into Gideon's. The gesture was decisive, unquestioned, a silent decree written by authority older than the land itself. Aida stood still. Gideon stood still. The wind paused. Even the insects hushed. The moment stretched long and thin, like a rope pulled toward a future neither of them had seen coming. A moment that would split his life in two before this morning. And everything after. Gideon felt his heartbeat slam against his ribs, each thud pushing him toward a decision that would shape the fate of all three of them, and possibly ignite a war. Finally, he inhaled to speak. But the word was sliced in half by a sudden noise from the north. Hoofbeats. Not Apache. Not wind, but loud. Hurried, impatient hoofbeats. White men. Gideon recognized the rhythm instantly. He recognized the voice that followed even more. Nash. We know you're out here. Jacob Ricks. A man who had stared down at Gideon with contempt for years. Gideon turned and saw 3 riders descending the valley, their faces flushed with anger and a kind of vicious self-righteousness. The Apache chief narrowed his eyes. The warriors behind him murmured soft and sharp like snakes preparing to strike. Gideon found himself trapped between 2 worlds. Apache on one side, white settlers on the other, both carrying danger, and he, a man who belonged to neither, was now being forced to choose both. Aida looked at him again. Her eyes were no longer guarded. They were asking him a question about the kind of man he was going to be. Gideon drew a long, slow breath, feeling time grind to a halt around him. And in that suspended second, he knew his life had been pushed to the edge of an irreversible decision. The thunder of hoofbeats rolled into the valley like war drums. The sand beneath Gideon's boots quivered with each pounding stride, and the shadows of 3 white riders stretched long and sharp across the cracked earth. Sunlight glinted off the metal of their guns, turning the air itself into a blade. Gideon turned fully. Placing himself between Aita and the newcomers, he recognized the man leading the trio, Jacob Ricks, his chest puffed up with the kind of swagger only ignorance could inflate. The 2 younger men behind him wore the same expression, narrowed eyes, jaws clenched, hands hovering near their holsters. Well, look at this. Ricks spat, pulling his horse to a stop. Heard the rumors, but damn didn't believe 'em. You really brought redskins onto white man's land. Nash, you're out of your damn mind. Gideon didn't reply. Didn't need to. Didn't dare. Behind him, the Apache warriors tightened around their chief, hands closing on bows and knives. No one drew a weapon, but the threat was thick enough to choke on. Aida stood despite her trembling legs. Her English was halting, but her voice carried like flint striking steel. This land belongs to no man. We have right to live. Ricks barked a laugh. Don't quote rules to me. Girl, you think crawling onto someone's ranch makes you family? Makes you human. One of the Apache warriors stepped forward, bow rising like the tongue of a rattlesnake ready to strike. Gideon raised his hand sharply. Stop. His shout cracked the tension so violently that both sides froze. Ricks looked at him, half smirking, half curled in disgust. You think you're in the middle of this? Nash, you ain't on their side. And sure as hell ain't on mine. You're nothing. A ghost of a man. And now what gonna marry an Apache woman? You're digging your own grave. Gideon clenched his jaw. The insult didn't hurt as much as the truth in it. He had been a ghost. But today, something was waking up. The Apache chief suddenly spoke a booming, gravel-deep sound that rolled across the valley. Even those who didn't understand him felt the weight. Aida translated, her voice tight. My father says, if they want war, war will come. But he will not abandon his daughters. Ricks burst into laughter, leaning forward in the saddle. War, here, with a handful of half-dead Injuns. I don't need war. I just need to teach Nash what happens when he betrays his own. Then he snapped, grabbed the girl. The 2 men beside him jumped off their horses, guns drawn, storming straight toward Aida. Everything happened in half a heartbeat. Aida didn't run. She didn't cower. Gideon stepped forward. planting himself between her and the raised pistols. Rix roared, "Move, Nash. She ain't yours." Gideon didn't turn around. He didn't falter. His voice was steady as an iron bar. "She belongs to herself. But right now she stands behind me, and I stand with her." A breathless silence. Then Rix shrieked, "Then you choose the Reds." Gideon's reply was like a blade drawn slow. "I choose what's right." A gunshot cracked the air. Rix fired. The bullet scorched past Gideon's cheek, hot, sharp, drawing blood. He staggered, vision flashing white. That single shot shattered the valley. Apache warriors surged forward like unleashed arrows. Rix's men tried to fire again, but 3 arrows thudded into the ground at their feet, stopping them cold. Rix scrambled backward toward his horse, fumbling for his carbine. And in that moment, Aita moved. She lunged with a ferocity born of survival and rage. She seized Rix by the collar and wrenched him off his horse, slamming him into the dirt. Her elbow drove into his stomach, knocking the breath out of him. He collapsed, choking. 2 Apache warriors closed in, arrowheads hovering inches from his skull. But Gideon shouted, "Wait." Every head turned. Aita paused mid-breath, sweat and dust streaking across her face. Her eyes burned not with fear, but with a wild, unbroken fire Gideon had never seen in another woman. Gideon approached slowly. Rix cowered in the dirt. The bravado drained from him like water from a cracked jug. Gideon seized him by the coat and hauled him upright. "Rix," he said, voice low and deadly calm, "I'm not choosing the Apache, and I'm not choosing you." He leaned close, breath hot with dust and fury. "I'm choosing what's right." Then he let go. Rix dropped like a sack of grain. "Everything that happened here," Gideon continued, "is because you decided you had the right to choose someone else's fate." Rix had no answer, no breath, no courage left. Gideon stepped back and turned to the Apache chief. "Don't kill him. Let him live with knowing he was wrong." For a long moment, the chief studied Gideon. Then he nodded a short, heavy motion that carried all the weight of the desert. The Apache warriors stepped away. Rix scrambled to his feet, terror choking him as he and his men mounted their horses and fled, dust trailing behind them like smoke from burning pride. Silence settled across the valley. Aita walked up to Gideon, standing close enough he could hear her breath. "You have chosen," she whispered. Gideon exhaled, chest rising with exhaustion and certainty. "Yes." She held his gaze wild, fierce, exhausted, alive. "Then from now on," she said softly, "whatever comes, comes for both of us." Gideon met her eyes, and for the first time, he understood. He hadn't just made a choice. He had crossed a line he could never return from. The sun slipped behind the rust-red ridges, leaving the valley washed in a soft gold haze. The wind, fierce just moments ago, settled into a quiet breath, returning the frontier to its familiar, fragile stillness. Gideon stood in the open yard, his fingers brushing the blood-stained strip of cloth tied around his wrist. The weight of the day pressed on him his choice, the danger it invited, the enemies it might awaken tomorrow or the week after. But when he looked over and saw Aita standing beside the corral, her posture steady despite everything they had endured, a calmness rose within him. For the first time in 3 long years, the road ahead didn't feel empty. Harder. Yes. Uncertain. Absolutely. Yet Gideon felt something he thought he had buried forever, a quiet willingness to walk forward again. Out here on the frontier, a single choice can change the fate of a life. If this tale stayed with you, ride on to the next story waiting on your screen, and consider subscribing so I can keep bringing more frontier legends your way.